hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online, Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Dewbs and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Congratulations to GB News Breakfast, voted by you as the nation's best multi-channel news programme at the prestigious Trick Awards.
Hello, good evening at 6 p.m. I'm Emily Carver and this is Dewbs & Co. You've got me this evening. Dewbs is away, but we've got a cracking show to kick off your weekend. So, the boldest set of changes to the health service in years. That's what the Prime Minister has promised today. £2.4 billion to help plug staffing shortages, future-proof the NHS, a once-in-a-generation move, the government says. But will this be enough to save a health service that seems to be in a permanent state of crisis? I want to know tonight, what would you do to save the NHS, and is it even savable? Then Boris Johnson has chosen to write his weekly column for the Daily Mail on the Rwanda policy. I'm glad he's not talking about a weight loss jab, to be honest, but he says it is our best hope, this policy, to stop evil people traffickers. Suella Braverman lost in the Court of Appeal, didn't she? But she insists it's not over yet, but with only the Supreme Court left to go. And yet another 100 or so migrants arriving on our shores this morning alone. Is it simply game over for the Rwanda plan? Should they give up and try a different tack? Let me know what you think. And I don't know about you, but I've been deeply disturbed by what is currently going on in France after a teenager was shot dead by a police officer during a traffic stop. Protests, looting, riots, violence, AK-47s. Is this France's George Floyd moment? And do you, like me, fear we could see similar unrest in this country? And could your bank account be closed because of your political views? Nigel Farage has claimed that the establishment is trying to force him out of the UK by closing his bank accounts. Other lenders have been accused of doing similar things to other customers who have controversial views. Should it be illegal to financially cancel someone based on their politics? Sinister stuff in my view. And we often talk about racism and discrimination, don't we? But are white men actually on the receiving end? The new head of the RAF has had to apologise for illegally discriminating against white men in their recruitment process. So that seems a pretty strong indicator that they are, all in the name of diversity, apparently. All of that to come tonight on Dewbs & Co with me, Emily Carver. But first, let's get the latest news headlines.
Good evening. It is 2 minutes past 6. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. The government is aiming to employ 300,000 new staff in England as part of its NHS workforce plan. More doctors, nurses and other healthcare workers will be trained, in addition to creating more university places for medical and nursing students. And there will also be a greater emphasis put on apprenticeships. The 15-year plan aims to reduce reliance on international recruitment and agency staff. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, says it focuses on 3 key areas of reform.
This is the NHS's own plan, and the government is proud to back it. Funding the expansion of education and training for the first 5 years in full, with over £2.4 billion of additional investment. You can trust this government with the NHS. The plan rests on 3 principles: train, retain and reform.
However, the Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting says you can only trust Labour with the NHS.
After 13 years of catastrophic mismanagement of the NHS, which has bred the worst crisis in its history, I'm not surprised the Conservatives are looking to Labour and taking our workforce plan and running with it. I'm sure the country will do that at the next general election too. Labour's got a strong record on the NHS, the shortest waiting times, the highest patient satisfaction in history. And now we've got to build on this workforce plan to go even further.
Lord Zach Goldsmith says he's happy to apologise for sharing his views on the Commons investigation into Boris Johnson's Partygate probe. The Tory peer has hit back after Rishi Sunak said he'd refused to apologise, saying his comments about the Privileges Committee were incompatible with his position as a minister. Well, Lord Goldsmith has now admitted he should not have commented publicly. In his resignation letter, he accused the government of climate change apathy, saying it made his role as Minister for International Environment untenable. A Cabinet Office source has told GB News they've no idea why Sue Gray is being cleared to start as Sir Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff. It's understood a written ministerial statement will be published as soon as Monday, saying the Partygate investigator broke civil service rules. The document was tabled hours before the Advisory Committee on Business Appointments said she was clear to take up her new role with Labour in September. British travellers to France are being warned to expect disruption, including curfews, as a result of the ongoing civil unrest. All large-scale events are to be cancelled and armoured vehicles are being deployed to suppress the riots, which authorities expect to continue for a 4th night. Protesters are demanding justice for a 17-year-old known only as Nahel M, who was shot dead by police in Nanterre on Tuesday. An officer's been charged with voluntary homicide. Bus and tram services are being suspended nationwide from 9 p.m. local time. A court's been told the Oscar-winning actor Kevin Spacey is a sexual bully who delights in making others feel uncomfortable. On day 1 of his trial at Southwark Crown Court, prosecutors described the Hollywood star as a man who sexually assaults other men. The actor faces 12 charges of sex offence against 4 men, which allegedly took place between 2001 and 2013. He denies all charges against him. Police have launched a double murder investigation after 2 people were killed in North London. A teenager, believed to be 15, and a 23-year-old man were found with stab wounds in Islington last night. A 3rd victim was also found with stab injuries. His condition isn't thought to be life-threatening. No arrests, though, have been made. Police believe a large number of people were there when the attack took place, and they're urging witnesses to come forward. The energy regulator says it's great news people will see their bills drop by £460 a year from tomorrow. Ofgem says it's taken a range of steps to stabilise the market and to protect customers. However, bills will remain a lot higher than they were 2 years ago, £800 more expensive. That's almost double. The regulator's urging people who are struggling to make payments to reach out to their suppliers as soon as possible. And millions more British people will be able to live and work in Australia when the age limit for working holiday visas is raised tomorrow. The extension from 30 to 35 means 16 million adults are now eligible. The visa duration will also be extended from 2 to 3 years without the need for consecutive stays or farm work. The free trade arrangement enables similar agreements for Australians to work and travel in the UK. TV, online, DAB and TuneIn Radio. This is GB News. And now it is back to Emily.
Welcome to Dewbs & Co. With me, Emily Carver. I'm standing in for Michelle this evening, one night only. Joining me until 7, my panel, Daniel Moylan, a Conservative peer in the House of Lords. And we also have David Curtin, the leader of the Heritage Party. As always, we've got a jam-packed show this evening, so please do get in touch with us about all of the topics we'll be discussing this evening. gbviews@gbnews.com is our email address, and on Twitter, we're at GBNews, but you probably already know that. But if you are new, those are our details. So let's get straight into tonight's show. The government has published its plan for a massive NHS shake-up. They're calling it the most ambitious transformation of the NHS in its history. Rishi Sunak explained his 15-year plan. It's backed by £2.4 billion of investment. So let's take a listen.
The plan rests on 3 principles: train, retain and reform. First, training. We'll double the number of medical training places by 2031, focusing on areas where there are too few doctors today. We'll train over 24,000 more nurses and midwives a year and increase the number of GP training places by 50%.
So here are the main points of the plan. We've got doubling medical school places to 15,000 a year, increase the NHS workforce by 300,000 by 2036-37, a consultation on cutting medical degrees to 4 years from 5, doubling nurse and midwife training places to 24,000 per year, and 1 in 5 clinical staff to be trained through apprenticeships, as well as plans. They are backed by £2.4 billion over the next 5 years. Part of the plan, this is a little bit of a controversial part of the plan, is to slash the medical degrees from 5 years to 4. That's in a drive to put tens of thousands of extra doctors on hospital wards. David, I'll come to you first. What do you make of that particular thing, cutting training from 5 years to 4 years? Do you worry that that could mean we have inexperienced doctors without enough qualifications?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds good, the whole plan, but this is a little bit of a thorn in the side of the plan because you can't do it on the cheap. You know, you need to train doctors properly. They need a hell of a lot of training. They need 3 years academic training. I mean, it used to be 3 years clinical training, and then before they become junior doctors. So to bring that all down to 4 years, I think really is cutting corners. So, yeah, I would get rid of that bit of the plan. And, you know, the thing with this is they say they got £2.4 billion for this. I assume that's over the whole 15-year transformation, which really is nowhere near enough to train an extra 60,000 doctors that they want and 170,000 nurses over the time. So if this is going to be something in order to do this on the cheap, then that's really scuppers the whole plan in a way.
Daniel, is this doing it on the cheap or is this just pragmatism?
I don't know. First of all, I think it's very good to have a plan because
yes, it's nice.
Well, it's more than just nice. I mean, we recruit huge numbers of people from overseas to come and work in the NHS when we could be training people here in this country to do many of those jobs. But you can't train people overnight. You've got to have a plan. You've got to have the training places for them. You've got to be able to recruit them and so on. If I had any criticism of the plan, it would be that it's a bit too slow in building up the training places that we're going to be offering. Turning to David's point, it's true that you won't be able to do this on the cheap. People are going to have to pay more through their taxes in order to have this. That's absolutely true. There might be some savings because you could be replacing quite a lot of agency staff that you have at the moment. I think that would be part of the plan. Those agency staff are quite expensive to employ, or they're not employed, but to use. If you can replace a lot of the agency staff with permanently employed people, you're probably in a better place financially. So there will be some savings, I'd hope, in that direction.
Yes, the Prime Minister has said that could... Well, there could be billions in savings by not using agency staff.
Well, but all billions is nothing in this.
But of course, we've had to use agency staff because of all the strike action.
Billions here, billions there. You know, I mean, you know, yeah, you can save billions. That could be a lot, could be a little, depending on the context. But you could certainly save money from doing that. So I think that's very encouraging as well. there is a point. David has a point. I think the truth is, at the moment, medical places for studying medicine to be a doctor are very hard to get, and so they tend to be some of the brightest people are the ones who actually get into those slots. Of course, if you open it up to a much larger cadre of people, then you'll be going further down the scale. If you shorten the training, then you might not be getting what you absolutely need. But then the question really is, with modern AI and all of that, do you need all of your doctors to be as qualified? Now, you say that probably shock you, but if you think what the average GP is doing, when really much of the time they're identifying symptoms, which they're now assisted in by technology and by computers and by references, and then they're referring people with those systems to specialists in hospitals, consultants and people who actually have expertise in what they think might be the cause of that. It isn't necessary for every GP to be absolutely the bee's knees at everything.
Now, the government says that this is... Sorry, David. The government says that this is the biggest reform since the NHS was started, I believe. But is this actually a reform? This is just simply throwing more money into recruitment, which is a fantastic thing. We need more doctors, we need more nurses. But is this almost a sticking plaster for a system that is failing beyond just staff shortages?
Yeah, right. It's throwing money at a problem which is very clearly there, that we are relying on migrants to come in who are qualified, who are good.
Apparently, just on that point, apparently nearly a quarter of our workforce in the NHS is currently recruited from overseas. They want in 15 years' time for that to be at around 10%.
Yeah, and that is a good aim. I think they've been reading our manifesto, actually, because that is one of the points that we need to make sure.
Labour says they've been reading theirs.
Yeah, indeed. But, I mean, absolutely, and that was how this was presented, and that was the headline in a lot of the reports today. And that's an admirable thing. We should be training enough British people to do all the jobs that need to be done in this country, and that includes doctors, nurses, midwives, GPs, and other specialist doctors. We shouldn't be taking doctors and nurses and midwives from other countries who have trained them, and they've invested in their young people where we haven't, and that's been going on for 25, 30 years. So this is a problem that needs to be rectified. I don't think it's the biggest reform in the NHS's history since 1948, but it is a good ambition to do this. It's an ambition that I would have. But in terms of reform, he hasn't really said much about that at all. I mean, it is grossly inefficient. You have these PPIs from the Labour days where you have contracts. For example, if you want to change a light bulb, you have to call a certain contractor and they'll charge you £80 to change a light bulb or something.
But is that just the public sector, or is it particularly bad in the NHS, Daniel? Because last time I looked, the NHS employs 1.6 million people, making it one of the biggest employers in Europe, if not the biggest employer. Is it impossible with an organisation like that to run it efficiently?
Under these plans, there'll be 2 million employed at the end of the 15-year period, so 1.6 will be a pleasant memory.
That's very interesting, actually, how much power NHS staff will have over the government, if you see it that way, in terms of strike action, in terms of bargaining power. 2 million people being employed by one publicly owned organisation. Quite incredible.
And the other thing I wanted to say was this 2.5 billion is going to go into wages. It's going to go into staff. It's going to go into staff pockets. None of it is going into producing better health outcomes, which is, after all, if you bear it in mind, is what the NHS is about. A better health outcome, for example, is a longer cancer survival rate. That's a better health outcome. Now, the purpose of the NHS is not simply to employ people. It's to produce better health outcomes. And the 2.5 billion isn't going into the equipment, the technology, the stuff like that could be producing those better health outcomes. That, if it's going to happen at all, will have to come from somewhere else. And as we know, the government's credit card is maxed out at the moment, now and for the foreseeable future.
Well, I mean, I would agree with you there, because this government has been so grossly financially irresponsible over 13 years that they make Tony Blair look good. And instead of actually spending money on something that is good, and they've wasted money on net zero, they've wasted money on furlough and lockdowns, which were unnecessary. Now they're wasting money on the Ukraine war, which we shouldn't be involved in. They're wasting money on HS2, on diversity officers, on migrant hotels.
Well, on
a
the
whole
point,
range
David,
of things
on the
that they
point,
could spend
on the point of Tory failure, Daniel Neal's just written in. He says, remember, the Tories cut medical school places and removed nurses' bursaries. Cameron and Osborne decided it was cheaper just to recruit from abroad. That's a fair point, isn't it? Do we reap what we sow? Have these problems been, political decisions?
There are political decisions have been made, but I just want to put it back to David. You know, I mean, the next thing, in 2 minutes' time, you'll turn around and David will be explaining about the Tories giving us austerity. That's the other complaint you get. Austerity.
We never had austerity.
High expenditure the other moment. Political decisions are made in the circumstances in which they arise. And it's true that we did cut back on money spent in public services without any noticeable falling off in outcomes, which is what really matters.
Just very quickly, David, obviously it's all well and good planning for the future and all these new nurses and doctors you're going to hire and train in this country. But what about right now? We have we're finding it difficult to retain staff. People are moving elsewhere or retiring early because of paying conditions, is what they say. Do we need to bite the bullet and up their pay?
I think pay needs to keep pace with inflation, you know, but what we've got is two extremes at the moment. The BMA are asking for 35%, the government's offering 5%. They need to reach a happy medium because inflation is 10%. So in order for people to have the same purchasing power, they need a 10% pay rise. I think that would be a solution to the problem.
And Daniel, just one last question. Is the NHS worth saving?
Well, we need a public health system, and the NHS is the one we've got. Whether today you would actually decide to nationalise and have a single organisation providing your health, providing your publicly funded health, no other country has done that. I know with the left, they're convinced this is the best model in the world, but nobody else has copied it. And whether you get the best outcomes from that, whether you get the right amount of patient choice, almost zero, whether you get the right amount of patient waiting, proper treatment of patients, so they're actually treated like adults, people who can make appointments which you can turn up for and actually you have the appointment at the time that it was agreed.
That'd be nice.
Or you come, or what happens now in most hospitals is you come in a 4-hour slot, you know, and you queue up in your 4-hour slot. Accident and emergency, is that, you know, is this the best system we could devise? If we were starting today, almost certainly we'd say no. We'd look for best practice elsewhere in the Western world, and we wouldn't come up with this.
Well, but yes, I don't think there's any appetite.
But we've got it.
There's no appetite for root and branch reform. This is what we've got. I'd argue that we should probably be thinking a little bit bigger. At the moment, it's all sort of sticking plasters, but we must welcome more doctors and nurses, I think, because they keep us alive. Anyway, coming up, Suella Braverman said she would do whatever it takes to stop the boats. But with the courts, the setback in the courts, is it game over for her Rwanda scheme? Is it game over for Suella?
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing. We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. This is Dewbs & Co with me, Emily Carver. I'm standing in for Michelle tonight, but keeping me company until 7 is Daniel Moylan, Conservative peer in the House of Lords. Thank you, Daniel. And David Curtin, the leader of the Heritage Party. So, you've been getting in touch about the NHS, this big NHS workforce plan. Do you give it a thumbs up, thumbs down? What do you think? Is the NHS savable? It seems to always be in some kind of state of crisis, obviously made worse by the pandemic. Faye's been in touch. She says, on the topic of NHS recruitment, Australia wants Brits, they want our doctors, etc. What will happen now is we taxpayers will pay and train up doctors and nurses for them to go and work in Oz. They must be bonded or something to work for the NHS for at least 5 years. A lot of people think that. They think if you've been trained in this country through our university system, taxpayer is partially funded your education, you should have to commit to the NHS for at least a couple of years or so. I think most people would agree with that, but is that against their civil liberties to be able to travel? And if Australia and other countries are offering them something better, offering them better pay, fewer hours to work every day, well, perhaps it's their right to go.
So wait on, haven't they paid fees for this education?
Well, they have,
haven't
but
they
it's
borrowed
subsidised as well.
Haven't they borrowed huge amounts of money to pay for this education? It's not like they've been given it free.
Well,
I mean, just have to remember, in my day, you got it free. In my day, you might be able to say, yeah, you've got an education free and you owe the country something back. I can see the argument for that. But if you've actually loaded up a huge amount of debt, paid your own fees in order to get your education, I think it'd be an impertinence to
well,
say
I don't think the £9,000 a year actually covers the entire cost of training to be a medical doctor. It would definitely if you did an arts degree or an English degree or something like that, where you have about 2 hours of lessons a week.
Maybe not 5 years, maybe 6 months.
But I do take your point. We can't really, strap people down and force them to work in the NHS, David.
Well, I think what you can do is say that we will pay your fees off if you work in the NHS, but the moment you leave the NHS, you have to actually continue paying your fees back like normal over the course of your life. And then that would say, that would tie people to the NHS so that they don't have to pay their fees back if they give something back to the country.
But what I would say is all these junior doctors, they talk about how the NHS is amazing and we have to sustain it and it's the best, the envy of the world. And then they go off to countries where there are different models of funding their health services, which is quite interesting. I believe Australia has a social insurance model, but it's still universal. Anyway, we're going to move on. Please do keep your views coming in on the NHS. I know it's a big topic and we could talk about it all hour, really, couldn't we? But anyway, the Home Secretary, she said the government is committed to ending cross-channel migrant boats. Of course she has, despite a court ruling that its Rwanda policy is unlawful. Braverman told MPs she would do whatever it takes to stop the boats and that it's not over yet. But do you think it's game over for the plan, or can Braverman salvage it somehow? Well, David, can she salvage it somehow?
No, and the Rwanda plan was always going to fail. It was set up to fail. It was announced in April 2022, last year, just before the local election campaign, where the Tory party was actually worried about losing loads of seats. I think it was throwing some red meat to their supporters to get them to go out and vote.
So cynical.
Well, I mean, I look at it and it was never going to work, because you send some people to Rwanda on a plane, and then we take some people who are refugees in Rwanda and put them on a plane back to the UK. So it was not a deportation scheme. It was an exchange scheme. It has £120 million, and it's only going to be viable for a couple of thousand people over 5 years. It's all set up to fail. They need to do far, far more, and I'll tell you what that is.
Well, you hold that thought. I'll come back to you with. You can tell us what the perfect solution is, David. But Daniel, I've seen that certain European countries are considering about adopting some kind of Rwanda scheme. A lot of people say this is immoral, it's inhumane, it's certainly unlawful, at least if you agree with what the courts have said. But other European countries are actually considering this type of thing.
Yeah, and that's in the context which a lot of the lefty Remainer world hasn't noticed, that a large number of European countries have swung markedly to the right in their recent elections. And it is countries like that which are now saying, hey, this is a great idea from Britain and this is what we should be doing, and they're exploring it as well. So I think that it's going to spread, whether it's Rwanda or another country. I think it's going to spread. Answers to your questions, because there are two separate questions. First of all is, can the Home Secretary win this in the courts and ensure it's lawful, either by making some changes to it or by taking potluck with the Supreme Court? I think the answer is yes, that is very, very likely. And she can pursue that, and I think that we will win in the courts in due course, and she can make the scheme, because they haven't said the scheme is bad, it is wrong in principle. They've just said that at that particular moment, the arrangements with Rwanda didn't provide sufficient safeguards. That could change, that could be changed by agreement with the Rwandans and by binding agreements with them. So I think that she can do that. The second question is the one David's been addressing, is if the scheme is in place, will it work? Will it have a deterrent effect? I think it'll have a very significant deterrent effect. Huge numbers of these people who are crossing in small boats have either paid hard cash in order to come to England, several £1,000s, or they've given commitments of, appalling commitments of enslaving themselves effectively, putting themselves in bonded labour to criminals for years. And I think once they start seeing that if you land on British soil in a small boat and 5 minutes later you're on a plane off to Rwanda, that they will stop paying that money and the business model of those criminal businesses will collapse.
Well, that's what I assumed, David. I agree with Daniel on that one. If you're paying €2,000 to cross the channel to get to England, and then you're sent to Rwanda, you're going to tell your friends or you're going to tell other people in Calais not to come, aren't you?
But no one's been sent to Rwanda yet. That's the problem. And no one will be sent to Rwanda.
Because it hasn't got through the courts yet.
No, and it won't get through the courts because they're always going to put up the obstacle of the ECHR, the European Convention on Human Rights. And we need to leave that in order to be able to do this. And, you know, she's just put through, the other thing that's happened this week is that the immigration bill that she's putting through in order to make this happen has been smacked back to the House of Commons by the Lords. And one of the amendments they put in is to say that we must adhere to the international treaties that we've signed up to. So there's the ECHR, there's the UN Refugee Convention. Now, both of those two things are a block in terms of human rights in sending people to Rwanda with this scheme. So we need to come out of both of them for this scheme to actually happen. But better than that, we need to push the boats back to France as they cross the channel.
That's not going to happen. Well, that's even more far-fetched than Rwanda.
No, it's not.
It's not going to happen.
Because we're sending the Royal Navy, we're sending the Border Force to pick people up. Just stop sending them to pick people up.
But hang on, David, the French won't take them back, will they, Daniel? The French won't take them back. We're already pledged to spend something like, what is it, £500 million we're going to send to the French over the next 3 years in order to help police the border and to stop people from crossing. Not working. The only thing that seems to be working is the agreement that we have with the Albanian president, Prime Minister, which seems to be working on reducing the numbers of Albanians coming over. But the numbers still seem to be on track to be very high indeed this year.
They do, but you can do a deal with the French that works. So, for example, remember they used to come through the tunnel in lorries and trying to get onto trains and things like that, and they'd come through the tunnel. The security built round the tunnel now is such that nobody comes through on that route. Nobody can get through on that route. That's why they've moved over to small boats.
Yeah.
That's where the small boats crisis has come from. It's come from actually success in closing off the tunnel route. So you can make agreements with the French that stick. If they want to, it's a good question now, if they do want to post-Brexit, and they've got other issues and concerns as well, like the country's in flames, that's their problem.
Of course, as always, there have been calls from commentators, opposition parties for Suella Braverman to resign, get the sack. She's failed, she's awful, she's, this nasty woman. Do you think Rishi Sunak should give her the sack over this?
No, not at all. I mean, it's not her fault. I think that the scheme was introduced by Priti Patel originally, but I mean, she wants to carry it on. But like I said, I don't think the Rwanda scheme is going to work, but she does, as Suella Braverman, she's one of the few people in the Conservative Party who is actually a Conservative and does, I think, genuinely want to control our borders. But she's not going far enough. She's not talking about coming out of the ECHR and pushing the boats back to France. We could have a state of emergency in the Channel, which would allow us to do that. That's what needs to be declared, and then we can do that. And that's just half the problem, because there's also still people coming in on the back of lorries that we don't see. We don't see those people, like those poor Vietnamese who were found dead in a lorry in Tilbury. That's also happening as well. So there's far, far more that we need to do to control our borders, both from illegal immigration and legal immigration as well, which is out of control, which is a whole other issue.
Whole
on
other
top of
debate.
this.
We could talk about that for hours too. I mean, the government has just completely let us down on this issue. I know it is an extremely difficult issue to solve, an extremely difficult problem to solve, but the government are running out of time now, aren't they? Rishi Sunak, 5 big pledges, one of them being stop the boats. He's not stopping the boats. He said he was making progress, but then experts said it's simply because of the weather. He's set himself a pretty tall order.
Well, he has made it clear that he wishes to be judged by his pledges, and that, I'm sure, is what the electorate will do, so I'm confident he's going to deliver them.
And on that note, coming up, Nigel Farage has claimed that his bank accounts have been closed without explanation. Should companies be allowed to shut out customers on the basis of politics?
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Dewbs & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Emily Carver. Keeping me company still until 7 o'clock is Daniel Moylan, Conservative peer in the House of Lords, and David Curtin, the leader of the Heritage Party. So let's get straight into our next story. Our very own Nigel Farage has claimed, I'm sure you've seen, that his bank accounts have been closed without explanation. He's calling this a serious political persecution at the very highest level of our system. He believes the establishment are trying to force him out of the UK by closing his bank accounts. So I want to ask, should companies be allowed to shut out customers on the basis of their politics? If they don't approve of what you say in the media, perhaps you're a politician, if you say something they don't like, should they be able to say, you know what, we're washing our hands of you? What do you think, David?
This is something that's been building over 20 years. I mean, the very first party that was shut out of a bank account, I think, was the BNP. Now, I think that some of what they say is deplorable. I mean, some of them would say that I'm not British because of the colour of my skin. But then it moved on from them to Tommy Robinson. Again, you know, there's someone that people don't like to talk about. Then Katie Hopkins, then Lawrence Fox, now Nigel Farage. So it started at people at the fringes, and now it's come into the mainstream.
So you see it as growing in momentum?
Yeah, I mean, it's over 20 years. It started with, you know, people that no one would defend. And now it's someone who was the leader of UKIP back in the day who won a European election, you know, as the biggest party in the UK in terms of votes in 2014. So it's come right now into the centre of the mainstream. And, yeah, this is a big problem.
Do you think this is a conscious effort by these companies, banks, to, well, try to censor people, or do they just want to protect their own reputations because they think that, I don't know, Nigel Farage is too controversial, they don't want to be, you know, joined to him in any way? What do you think it's about?
What I think it's about, actually, is money laundering regulations and their complete misapplication.
Right, OK.
Under a regulator, the Financial Conduct Authority, which is totally useless. And the burden of these regulations on the banks has now got to the point where many of them are saying, we're not going to apply these regulations anymore because it's so burdensome, so expensive and so difficult to do it. We'd rather close the customers' accounts. It's cheaper and easier for us to say we'd rather not have you as a client. And this is happening to huge numbers of people.
So you don't think this is about political persecution,
It's partly about, it might be about political persecution, and David has a point, and it's happened to the Free Speech Union as well. And in the so-called liberal Canada, of course, they did it to the truckers who were protesting and cut off their access to their banks as well. So it can be used as an instrument of political persecution, but it's also being used, it's also the banks themselves who are not being properly regulated and they're not properly applying the regulations, are doing this because it's become too much trouble. And half the time, you know, they don't even do this work themselves. They outsource it to other companies which specialise in it, and they get paid by the amount of work they do. So your name comes around all the time. In my own family, because I'm a politically exposed person, anyone who's a member of the House of Lords, anyone who's a member of Parliament, a judge, a diplomat, member of the royal family, you and all your family and your known associates are covered by this. I've had it happen to a member of my family who's a pensioner, who's twice had his account frozen, and we've had to get it unblocked. It's taken weeks. Of course, during that time, his direct debits aren't paid, which means, and he can't get access to his pension. It has an effect on his credit rating. It's preposterous for a pensioner.
Well, you can't live without a bank account, can you,
It's
David?
very, very
really?
hard.
Very hard to function. You can't have a job. You need to be paid, well, if you know, unless you're getting cash in hand.
Right.
You need to have a bank account.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's what people will start to do. They will go back to having cash in hand. I mean, you can, you know, it's almost, everyone almost can get a bank account with a fintech company, you know, a pay-as-you-go card. But it's very hard, you know, if you don't have a bank account, because most people don't go to them, some people don't even know about
But this blacklisting of people, this is just an iteration of cancel culture, isn't it? It's these banks shutting down because they start with, you know, the progressive tweets and policies, the warm, fuzzy diversity and inclusion. Then that progressivism becomes authoritarianism, doesn't it?
Yeah, it
You
started
must
off-
agree with us, or we think you're beyond the pale, and why would we allow you to have our product, have our bank account? We don't approve of what you say.
I think there are some people there, you know, on the far left, as I would say, who want to totally destroy everything that someone has if they don't have the right opinions. Started off by no platform them on the stage. Now they want to no platform them from financial institutions, which is very, very sinister.
I had an amendment to the Financial Services and Markets Bill only a few weeks ago that would have taken domestic politically exposed persons out of scope of the law altogether. The government wasn't having that, but they did say, and they agreed to do this, they're obliged now by the law to do this, they're going to carry out a review in 12 months. I bet you they're wishing today that they accepted my amendment. They'd have a knock-down answer to all this.
Well, yes, and if you're at home and you've been thinking about this, please do let me know what you think about what's happened to Nigel Farage. Do you think he's a victim of political persecution? It certainly looks that way. He certainly thinks it is. Is this the kind of society we now live in? But we're going to move on to something equally, if not more shocking, what's been going on in France. Nearly 900 people have been arrested after a third night of rioting across France. Several hundred police have been injured. Of course, the violence was sparked across the country by the fatal police shooting of a 17-year-old boy, Nahil M, during a traffic stop. Daniel, this is shocking what's going on in France. Of course, we've seen that France can sometimes be a little bit of a tinderbox, can it not? But this seems to be something different that we're seeing in Paris and across the country.
No, it won't be any different. The French have never succeeded in integrating or even wanting to integrate their immigrant population. I don't know anything about this young man, except what I've heard on the papers, but it's possible that he's a recently arrived immigrant. But it's equally possible his family's been in France for the last 3 or 4 generations. But they're still living, most of them, in these soulless tower blocks in what are called the banlieue, the so-called suburbs of Paris. And the French attitude to it seems to be rather different from ours. The French attitude is that occasionally you have a riot, you put the lid on it, and then you go back to normal and you don't do anything about it till the next riot.
Yes, I have experience of the Parisian banlieue because on a study year abroad, I studied French at university as part of my degree. I went to a university in one of the banlieues, populated, I'd say 90% by North African heritage people. And you could see that totally no integration with the French. You know, you'd come in, it was where the airport was, and then people would travel in and then forget the banlieue. Do you think this is a consequence, this type of unrest is a consequence of failed multiculturalism in France, failed integration policies?
Yeah, it has. I mean, wherever you have rapid mass immigration, as most Western European countries have had, who's driving this, I'm not sure, but it causes problems because people come in at such a rate, they don't immediately become French or German or British as soon as they cross the border. They keep their values.
No, this is talking about people who've often been there for 3, 4 generations. These are people whose families came to France in the 1950s very often, and there has been no integration. That's the remarkable difference. There are people of North African heritage living in this country, I know, in parts of London especially, who have been here for the last whose families have been here for 3 or 4 generations, and they are very, very much more integrated into society. They're very much more part of society than is the case in France. The French just don't seem to be interested or care.
So do you blame the French?
I think like many European countries, there are many European countries, and it's a hard thing to say, but where racism is much more, a subtle sort of racism is much more acceptable than it would be here.
And overt. And
overt sort of racism is much more acceptable than it would be here, yes. Not just France.
The incident that triggered this thing that's happening in France now, and I've seen it, it is shocking. I mean, they should have shot the tyres out of the car rather than shooting the boy.
Oh, yeah, I can see why people are angry and disturbed by this, of course.
We had a similar thing in the UK in 2011 when Mark Duggan was shot by police in Tottenham in North London. And the thing with both of these things is the government, the police acted very, very quickly to arrest the policeman who was at fault. They have done that in France, and they've already put him up on a charge of manslaughter, but the genie's out of the bottle. And I think there's a lot of pent-up... Obviously, you know, the tensions are just there, and how they get a lid on it, I don't know.
There's a lot of pent-up tensions. It's quite extraordinary that this will be the fourth night of riots this evening. Interestingly, to your point, Macron seems to be standing up for the police, saying that none of this is justified. He may well call a state of emergency. I know there are curfews in many towns and cities in France tonight to try to stop the worst of this, but people brandishing AK-47s from some of the footage we've seen, violence, looting, rioting. It really is what you'd expect to see in a war zone by the looks of things, by some of the footage that is coming through. But coming up, white males in the RAF, the Royal Air Force, were apparently discriminated against in a recruitment drive aimed at boosting diversity. So what's going on there? Stay tuned.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything, I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point. But
and action.
Sergeant, read my superstar panel. They're already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News. Britain's watching.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News. Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Emily Carver. I'm standing in for Michelle. So, our last story of the night. The head of the RAF has been made to apologise after an inquiry found that 31 white male aviators were discriminated against in favour of women and ethnic minority candidates. This was over a 2-year period. Let's get straight into this, Daniel. We haven't got much time left on the show, unfortunately. But do you think, in this day and age, in society, white men are actually being discriminated against?
Well, we know they are because the RAF has just said they are and is willing to compensate for it.
Well, there you go, done.
So there isn't the slightest doubt about the fact that it's happening, and I bet it's happening outside the RAF as well, and not just in the public sector and in the armed services, but also in the private sector in large measure. So, yes, I should think it is happening, and it's because we are obsessed with this constant notion, especially in the private sector, of ESG, which is their form of left-wingery that they impose on themselves, and their investors demand it, and their environmental, social and whatever concerns, and they want to produce nice charts and tables showing how many women they employ and what their gender pay gap is and everything like that. And, of course, there's discrimination against men as a result, and white men in particular.
Do you know what? In terms of career, there's never been a better time to be a female. We have all the opportunities and sometimes we get priority.
Yeah, well, you've always had the, you did have the opportunity already, but yeah, this is the Equality Act, isn't it, which actually specifically allows what they call positive action. But what that really is positive discrimination, which is wrong because, and it doesn't make any sense because if you're a company, if you're an organisation, you want to employ the best person for the job, so you have the best outcomes as a business or as an organisation. But when you have to, or decide you're going to adhere to this ESG, as Daniel said, and do positive action and so on. You put people in jobs who are not the best person for the job. You put them there on the basis that they're a woman or they have a darker skin or they're LGBT. That isn't any way to run a successful business. It doesn't matter what your sex is or your colour is. Just employ the best person for the job. That's what should make sense.
I was just rooting through all the tabs that I have open on my laptop here because I made a list of stories that have come up where usually public sector, but also companies, have hiring policies that are blatantly discriminatory. For example, I think there was a police force. It may or may not have been West Yorkshire, so I'm sorry if I've got it wrong. But they had a job ad going that was only for women and ethnic minorities. We've seen this in other areas of the public sector. We also see companies as well, graduate schemes only open to BAME. It's, do you think this sort of thing should be illegal?
Well, it is illegal.
Well, clearly it's not. It's happening and no one's doing anything about it.
Positive discrimination, and it's all nonsense, but positive action is allowed, positive discrimination is illegal. And, of course, it's very easy to fall either side of that line. I feel rather sorry for the head of human resources who was telling the RAF top brass, you are asking me to do something which is illegal. I've taken advice on it. And she was forced out of her job as a result. I hope she gets some appropriate compensation. So the legal advice comes in, but people aren't interested because the distinction is too fine for it to be applied legally and fairly in any context.
Well, of course, the alternative view is that we need this kind of positive action because for years and decades before, ethnic minorities and women were discriminated against. So this is about balancing.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure about that, but you don't want to swing the pendulum too far the other way, do you? Because then you have discrimination the other way. You want to have a world where there is no discrimination, and what we need to do is get rid of these bits of the Equality Act which allow this to happen and actually, in some ways, force companies to do it.
That's a bit old-fashioned to be a white male. Anyway, that's all we've got time for. Sorry, Daniel, I know you're just trying to come in, but thank you to my panel, Daniel Moylan and David Curtin. If you've missed any of today's show, you want to catch up on previous episodes, you can, of course, download the Dewbs & Co podcast. It's available wherever you get your podcasts from. Just search for Dewbs & Co. Lee Anderson's Real World is coming up at the top of the hour. Thank you very much for joining me.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The people's channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute?